Maxwell Brown. Thanks for being here, Max.
Thank you very much for having me, Sean.
All right, so we're gonna dig into an example that you built, but um, you're working at Effectful. You're working with Effect every day, and I thought it would be really good to just kind of like start by setting the context. Yeah, I think there's a wide range of understanding as it comes to Effect as it exists in the JavaScript and TypeScript ecosystem. So, can you maybe give us just a little bit of an intro around Effect?
Sure. Yeah, I am Max. I work at Effectful Technologies, which is the company that's behind the open source development of Effect and all its ecosystem libraries. And the goal of Effect is really to bring a lot of production grade patterns from other ecosystems into the world of TypeScript. So Effect is a library that's designed to help you write production grade TypeScript from the beginning. It functions as an effect system, and I know folks may not be familiar with what that is, but we can sort of get into that maybe a little bit later. But really, the crux of Effect and why it was developed is because there was a lack of um, production gradedness that we felt like existed in the TypeScript ecosystem when building like a robust, particularly when Effect was born, really server side applications. Although now it's starting to leak into the front end more and more. Um, and so, really, the library was born out of a desire to have really robust um, production grade code from the start. Mike, who is the creator of Effect and the CEO of Effectful Technologies, actually originally developed the library when he was working at a fintech startup. And so they had very strict regulations around what they were, how they had to ship, what they could ship, and they wanted to basically move their stack to TypeScript, but they just didn't feel comfortable enough doing that because of the like lack of guarantees that you kind of have when you're working in, I'll call it like vanilla TypeScript. So he built Effect basically to be that robust framework for them to be able to ship quickly in a highly regulated environment. So yeah, that's basically like the goal of Effect. It's to help developers write production grade software with TypeScript. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of applications for where kind of Effect fits into the stack, and we can sort of get into that maybe as we go along here.
Sure. Yeah, and before we do that, could you think of maybe I don't know, like one example where you feel like TypeScript falls short of that, just like giving you what you need out of the box for a production application?
Yeah, I mean, I think a really easy example is in AI applications. I mean, I'll use this example just because it's so relevant to a lot of developers today who are trying to build these apps. We've seen Effect be adopted very early by a lot of different AI startups that we work with, and even companies that are much larger but are starting to develop features like AI features into their products. So we've seen like a lot of uptake in like the AI community with Effect. And I think it stems from the desire to have that production gradedness up front. You know, when you're building an AI system, it's very non-deterministic. You sort of need a lot of things up front that maybe would be afterthoughts in like your traditional
Hmm.
TypeScript application, namely things like observability, things like the ability to have robust typing on errors so that you can retry things, the ability to interrupt computations so that you're not wasting a ton of money as things are running. And Effect excels at all of these different things. I think most people are familiar with Effect maybe from like the error tracking aspect, but it's also very useful. It has built-in observability, so when you write Effect programs, you can just annotate every piece of your program with spans and then plug it into whatever telemetry provider you want to get telemetry instrumented throughout your whole application. So for AI use cases, it's extremely important because the non-deterministic behavior means observability is important upfront.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and it also has a dependency injection uh, aspect to the library as well. So you get requirements tracking in the effect type as well, and so you can inject dependencies from different parts of your application. and that makes testing much easier with um, I mean, the AI use case is like the one that comes to mind right now, but testing really anything becomes much easier when you have a robust DI framework at your disposal. So, um, yeah, I think the AI use case is like an easy example, but basically, like anywhere where you need to ship like robust code from the start is um, kind of where I see Effect fitting into the stack right now.
Awesome. Okay. Okay. Well, let's jump into this example. You want to kind of like maybe take us for a spin on the actual UI and the application at first, and then maybe we can take a peek under the hood.
Yeah, of course. Um, it's funny. This demo was born out of me wanting to experiment more with Effect, our AI SDK on the front end. And so let me just share my screen really quick. Can you folks see the screen?
There it goes. Yep.
Yeah. So this demo really grew out of a desire of mine to test. Effect has its own AI SDK that's designed to work really well with all the other ecosystem packages that we have. Um, and this demo was born out of me wanting to see if I could integrate really nicely the Effect AI SDK on the front end with the AI SDK on the the Effect AI SDK on the back end with the AI SDK on the front end.
Okay.
Effect doesn't have a lot of uh, front end integrations at the moment. They're things that we want to build in the future, but we don't have a ton. So this started as an investigation into kind of a compat layer between Effect AI and the AI SDK. And then it sort of grew into me wanting to see how easy it would be to plug Effect AI into the Netlify AI gateway, which it turns out is a single line of code, which is really nice for working with Effect apps on Netlify. Um, and for most folks who have seen any demos from me ever before, if you haven't, then welcome to every demo I've ever done involves dad jokes or puns.
I mean, it's a
So
classic example, and I also think like uh, in the way that you used to build examples would be like you needed this big repository of kind of those classic jokes right now, and I think it's really interesting to have to be using the dad joke approach for AI examples because of that non-deterministic behavior. Like you get some actually pretty funny jokes, and then sometimes it totally flops, which is great.
yeah, I mean, it's really it's an easy way to build easy topic to build a demo around, but also like you said, I like just getting dad jokes at my fingertips all the time. So
Yes.
this worked out really
Yes.
nicely. Um, but yeah, maybe we can just like uh, do a quick example of like how this thing works. You can either go straight to the chat, but I think it would be more interesting if we click one of the canned uh, topics. Maybe we'll like
Hey, kiddo.
ask our dad bot to tell me a dad joke. Um, and kudos to one of our other team members, Kit Langton, for getting all the sound effects and our little dad here, which we've sort of started calling Clay, just because we have our Clay dad here. His name's Clay. And then so let's maybe fire this off.
Love the sound effects are fantastic. And so is this using a an MCP server as well?
No, actually, it's using just regular tool calls. So
Okay.
I can sort of like walk through like how this works on the back end side of things, but this is just using standard tool calls through the Effect AI SDK to call out to the Icon has dad joke API. So
Mm-hmm.
it searches for dad jokes through that API, and if it can't find anything relevant, then we just tell the AI to like sort of come up with one on its own. So we got Clay here giving us a nice dad joke, and then we have Clayby, our little Clay baby,
Clavy, yes.
uh, asking for different things. And you can chat with Clay about different topics. You could ask, what is the history of the world? And Clay will give you the history of the world from the perspective of a dad who really likes to uh, have groan-inducing puns for anything that you talk to them about. But the point of this was not really like the front end piece. A lot of we wanted to be fun on the front end and everything like that, but it was really uh, the like technical aspects that I was more interested in, seeing if we could get wired up. So the front end is like pretty bare bones. This is like the chat interface we have, and it's pretty much it. But I think there's a lot of cool like technical aspects we could talk about with how this is working on like the back end, and then like how it's integrated with the AI SDK and all their hooks on the front end.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, let's do it. Let's jump over there and kind of get our hands dirty in the code.
Cool. Let me switch screens in 1 sec. There we go. So let me zoom in a bit. I'll use the README as a test. Is that big enough for you? I think maybe we can look.
Yeah, I think that's
code and see.
that's probably good. Yeah, I can read that fine. I think maybe yeah, there we go. Perfect.
Cool. Yeah, so this is a TanStack Start app that is deployed on Netlify. It makes use of the Netlify AI gateway. It also makes use of Netlify blob storage for persisting chats. At the moment, it's just single tenant, so like you don't have the ability to like log in and have your like chat history show up.
Mm-hmm.
But for like the duration of a single chat, I mean, you noticed when we were talking with Clay before that he's able to keep track of like the history of the conversation. He has the tool calls that were invoked as part of the chat history, and you can like sort of see that streaming into the front end. So if we look at and again, this is a pretty standard TanStack Start app. So for anybody who's used TanStack Start, you'll be familiar with the structure of the project. But we have a routes directory, which is how we route on our application. And in the API folder here, we have a single API route, which is our chat API route. And in here, there's quite a bit of stuff going on. We could sort of walk through different pieces of it. But if we jump like straight to the end where the actual route is declared, again, pretty standard TanStack Start stuff for AI API routes. We've got our API chat route, and we basically just take the request and pass it into our Effect HTTP app. So the whole backend here is built with Effect. And so we've got Effect HTTP, we've got Effect AI, and then like just standard like the Effect core framework. And we can talk about each one of these things individually, but maybe we could focus first on like just the AI aspects of this, and
Okay.
then we can like sort of go from there.
Great.
So I mentioned before that it was extremely easy to get this set up with Netlify, especially like the Netlify AI gateway. So when you're using Effect AI, you have the ability to use our provider integrations to create clients to communicate with the different AI providers. So in this case, I'm just using our OpenAI provider to communicate with the OpenAI API. So this, and you'll have to forgive some of the terminology. Some of this is Effect terminology that I know folks may not be familiar with, but just kind of like, if you can ignore some of the terminology and just focus on like what we'll talk about, we can always talk about like these terms later.
Okay.
But suffice to say, this is basically constructing a what we call in effect a layer that is meant to produce a client that will communicate with OpenAI. And if you are a user of Effect AI and you want to plug into the Netlify AI gateway. It was literally a single line of code to do that, which was really nice. Um, Basically, the Netlify AI gateway gives you a OpenAI base URL environment variable when you actually
Hmm.
deploy this in the Netlify function. And you can just use effect. We have a module that's designed to read configuration variables. By default, the it, it's designed to read configuration variables from what we call like a config provider. And by default, Effect will default you to a config provider that reads from the environment. But you can compose these config providers together. So you could, for example, create a config provider that starts by trying to read from the environment and then maybe tries to read from like a config file and maybe also reads from, I don't know, command line flags or something like that if you have a CLI program. So
Interesting. Okay, so you can kind of have like one funnel into to using these values, and maybe keep them in different places because they're different providers or because they have different levels of sensitivity or something like that.
exactly, and the config module is pretty flexible in that regard. So you can design, if you wanted to, you could design a config provider that's pretty flexible. But again, in our case here, it was just using the default config provider that reads from the environment is enough.
Mhm.
So here we're reading a string, which we're reading literally the OpenAI base URL in production. And then we have a fallback here. So we're in effect, we have this pipe syntax that if you've been following, like for example, the JavaScript pipe operator thingy, this
Mhm.
is kind of like a in library or in code, a non like language native way to do the same sort of piping operations together. So it's basically like running this and then pipe running this like sequentially. So the result of one function gets piped into the input of the next. So it would be the same thing as doing this, for example, and like
Yep.
having passing it as a curried argument. So again, I'll try to keep like the effect syntax discussion to a minimum, but um, what we're doing here is trying to read this variable, and if it doesn't exist, we fall back to undefined. Because in development, when we don't have the Netlify AI gateway to plug into, we just fall back to OpenAI directly, the default OpenAI API URL.
Yes, yes. And one thing I wanted to clarify for folks that are watching in is, yeah, that I think the really valuable piece of and really the cool part of the AI gateway for Netlify is that it gives you these environment variables. So you don't have to have that account with OpenAI
Yep.
after you've deployed, and we're just these keys are there ready to go, and it'll just work when you pick this up and deploy this code to production.
Yeah, I literally had to do nothing. All I had to do was plug this in
Yes.
and deploy my app, and it worked. And
Yeah,
it was
doing
like I
nothing
was
is
connected.
great.
I enjoy doing nothing. So,
No,
um,
likewise.
and then so there's lots of combinators, methods, whatever you want to call them, in the different effect modules. In the config module, we also have the ability to read what we call like redacted or secret variables. So here we're passing for the API key. We use a config.redacted method to read the OpenAI API key environment variable, and all of this allows us to create our OpenAI client layer. And again, I didn't have to do this. The Netlify AI gateway gave me this. So again, super easy to like get this set up. Um, and in effect, these layers allow us to like kind of produce what we call like services. So this produces for us, if we hover the type here, this produces an OpenAI client for us. And it might, when we build this layer, it might fail with some error. In our case, a config error. So if one of these configs is missing, we would fail in that case when we attempt to actually build this layer to produce this thing. And then you'll notice that this layer also has a third thingy here, which tells us that it has a requirement on an HTTP client. So effect layers are a way of composing the ability to build a service, and the ability to express like the failures that can happen when you build that service and the requirements you need. into like a single type that can then be like further composed. So you can build these layers up, um, and as you build them up, the types will track the things that you're producing and the things that you need. So it's kind of cool. I really like building my applications around layers. And for those who have like kind of gotten into Effect and seen the like value um, of like composing these different literally layers onto your application, it is a very nice way to develop and keep your services encapsulated. Um, anyway, that was a lot of discussion about like a pretty simple thing. We're literally just building an OpenAI client here, but where it starts to get cool is when we start getting into like persistence. So the Effect has a vast number of modules across all of our different um, all of our different packages. And in our AI SDK, we have the ability to create what we call chats, which, language models in our AI SDK are single request, single response.
Okay.
But when you create a chat, it kind of wraps up a language model and then tracks the chat history for you. So as you invoke like generate text or stream text or whatever, all of the history that's being generated every time you invoke one of those methods on the chat will allow you to keep track of that history and uh, sort of like a way to you don't have to like pass the previous history back in. And we'll look at like usage of that in a second. Um, but all this layer is doing, we can kind of revisit this in a moment, is creating a chat that persists via the Netlify blob storage. So in this case, the chat, instead of being only tracked in memory, it also tracks the chat in Netlify blob storage. So like every time you invoke a generate text method, it would then persist that chat history into the blob that's currently connected. Which I grabbed this environment variable I did set up, but it allows me to basically configure the blob store ID that I want to use.
So if you didn't do that, you would the persistence layer would still be just in memory, which is that right?
If I used the chat module without configuring a persisted layer, so this like layer persisted gives me back like a chat persistence service that my
Mm-hmm.
application can use, which allows me to create persisted chats. In
Okay.
development, it falls back to the file system. So if we look at like, I think I might have an example. Yes, in development, I have this like chats directory, which is where like persisted chats go uh,
Okay.
in development. So again, like if this variable doesn't exist, it falls back to this one, and then I have this method here which creates a layer. This is getting a little bit in the weeds with Effect, but basically it creates a key value store, which is a module in Effect that abstracts the whole concept of a key value store, and lets me express this key value store as either a Netlify key value store, which is backed by blobs, or just like a file system key value store. So
Okay.
depending on whether or not I've actually got this store ID, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Um, but if we actually like skip some more of the layers and start looking at how the app actually works, when we invoke this endpoint, uh, we this is all the logic that runs in Effect. Um, and I've I'll share the link to this repository in case folks are curious and want to read a little bit of this code. But I've tried to annotate as much of it as I could for folks who might be new to Effect. But in Effect, we have this concept of an HTTP app, which is basically just a type alias around an effect which produces a server response, might fail with some error, and gets a server request in the Effect environment. So uh, you can think of the Effect environment as as the place where all the services in your Effect app are kind of live, and you can extract them in your Effect program. which we'll see. So here, for example, we're extracting the chat persistence service. So I mentioned before that we have that persistence layer that we built up, which produces a chat persistence service. In this case, our app is going to require a chat persistence service. So if you look, the third type parameter, which we're starting to build up here, one of the things that we require for this app is the persistence service. So we get the chat persistence service. Um, because the request is in the environment, we can we can use methods that operate on the environment to parse the request. So I'm basically parsing the incoming request from the client here and getting different parameters out. And we can look at the client in a second. But this basically allows me to construct the language model that I want to use based on whatever the client sent me. So uh, in the chat interface on the bottom, you can toggle between, I think, like GPT-4o mini and GPT-4o. And then I use the persistence service to get or create a chat for this particular chat ID. So if the chat exists already, it will load that chat, kind of like hydrate it for this request, and allow you to have access to that history. And this is really nice because having persistence means that you can configure the AI SDK on the front end to only ever send the most recent message that was sent by the user. So you don't, because with the AI use case, especially for a chat app, the more you chat, the more the context grows. So sending that whole chat history over the wire starts to become like prohibitive for bandwidth purposes. So anyways, persistence allows us to only send and receive the most recent message. Then we do a little bit of logic here to convert from the AI SDK message like format to our own prompt format. We inject the system prompt into the prompt if we need to. And then for anybody coming from the AI SDK, these might look somewhat familiar, these methods, create UI message stream and create UI message stream response. And this is kind of like, I guess, for the Effect users in the audience, where it gets kind of interesting, and even maybe for folks who don't use Effect but are interested. This is what I was working on for this particular demo. Our AI SDK has no integration with the AI SDK whatsoever. But I worked on, for this demo, a like compat layer, which allows you to kind of have the same APIs to some degree as the AI SDK. You can create a UI message stream by, invoking stream text and things like that. You can merge stream responses back into the message stream you're creating here. And then this stream that you get back, which is an effect stream. One second. It's an effect stream. You can then just pass that into the create UI message stream response to send this stream to the client. So basically, under the hood, this will create a server sent event stream for you, and then send that out as like a normal server response to the client. So without getting, like, again, too in the weeds on the details of Effect here, I think the interesting components that kind of came out of this were persisted chats didn't exist before this demo for Effect. So now you can wire up persisted chats like however you want because of the whole concept of layers in Effect. You can like have whatever the concept of like the actual thing that does persistence is separated from the chat persistence in Effect. So you can plug in whatever like layer you want to actually do the persistence to create the chat persistence layer, which is kind of nice. So everything's
so like
kind
if
of
you wanted
decoupled.
to say store it in a database, you could configure or that persistence layer to be the database, and then then you could start to introduce authentication, if you wanted to move away from like the single tenant example.
Yeah, actually, one of the things I didn't have time to do with this demo that I wanted to try to do was I've been very interested in testing out if you're familiar with convex. I've been very interested in like testing out Convex. We actually earlier today had RJ from Convex on our office hours talking about an effect wrapper he's building for, or an effect SDK he's building for Convex. Um, and I've been very interested in like trying it out. And so I didn't have time to do this, but one of the things I wanted to do was build like a convex persistence layer that I could plug into the chat persistence layer, basically compose the two together. And then instead of persisting to like blob storage, I could persist to like their database, for example, and then build auth on
Hmm.
top of that so that I could pull down like all the chats for a user and then, build the normal AI chat interface that we're used to, where you have your chats on the left side that are all like the chats that you've done in the past. You can
Yeah.
click into it, get your history, whatever. Um, didn't have time for this demo, but um, because with Effect, the because of the way layers work in Effect, you can sort of like separate those two concerns. You can, and what's it's nice too, because
Hmm.
like you could imagine in testing, instead of plugging in I mean, you see a perfect example of it here, where in development, I don't have the ability to use Netlify blobs, right? So I just switched the implementation over to the file system in development. So because of the way layers work in Effect, it's really easy to uh, configure how the app behaves, um, and change the behavior of a particular service, based on the implementation that's provided at that point in time. Um, so yeah, it's kind of nice to work with. But chat persistence was one cool thing that I worked on for this, and then the ability to send AI SDK UI messages from like the Effect SDK over to the front end, was really nice as well, as a compat layer here, because now for
Hmm.
like folks that are using Effect AI or who are interested in it, they can continue to use the AI SDK on the front end, like all because there's a ecosystem of hooks and dev tooling and whatever around that. But if you're interested in using Effect on the back end, there's this compat layer that I'm working on getting upstreamed into our AI SDK that allows you to have similar functionality. Um, so if we look, for example, at the front end, let's take a quick peek at where's my chat? Here we go. So if I scroll down here, you can see on the front end, I'm just using the normal, like, for folks who are familiar with the AI SDK, this will look pretty familiar. Normal like use chat hook. I mentioned that I only ever send the most recent message here, but this payload is what's being parsed on the server side. So again, if we go back to the server side here, you'll notice that this payload is the same thing that's being parsed on the server side as well. So we
Yeah.
get
Yep.
our ID message and everything. So it's kind of cool. You get again, this hasn't been like released yet on the Effect side of things, but the API should feel familiar to folks coming from the AI SDK, but with Effect on top. And some of the benefits that brings, uh, is like this chat UI message here. Like in the AI SDK, this is a generic type you have to pass in. In the Effect AI SDK, this is actually an effect schema. We haven't even like touched the idea of schemas, but Effect has its own like schema library as well. So everything that goes through this stream is validated by an Effect schema, and can also be safely encoded because it's also being passed to the create UI message stream response. So um, instead of like just calling JSON.stringify, for example, you could have stuff in this UI message. You could imagine like you have a metadata part in your UI message that's like a class. As long as it's backed by a schema, you could actually serialize that class over the wire and parse it back out on the front end. And that's kind of the
Okay.
benefits you get of like the effect schema is one of the benefits you get is the ability to have um, safe serialization over the wire encoding and decoding of types that would normally not be JSON stringifiable. Um,
Oh, okay. Yeah, that is very cool. Useful.
yeah, so I know I threw a lot at you. And again, for those who are not familiar with like Effect, this the syntax definitely takes like a little bit of getting used to, and is like a little bit of a hurdle. We fully acknowledge that Effect has a learning curve, um, but I think like the benefits you get from using a framework like Effect are apparent once you start using it for a real use case, like a use case where you need like your software to behave the exact way that you've specified, where you need telemetry, where you need the ability to handle errors like on a very granular level, where you need the ability to interrupt requests that are ongoing in a safe manner. And what's nice about Effect too is, we've talked about all the compat stuff that I've worked on here, and like this whole server's running an Effect HTTP like handler, everything like that. Um, but Effect is incrementally adoptable. It has a very nice, uh, it has a very like nice integration with promises. So if you have promise-based code and you want to start introducing Effect into your app, you could write a little piece of your app in Effect, run it to a promise, and then all of a sudden, like you've got your Effect program. Now the result is the promise, and you can just use that in your normal like promise-based code and slowly like keep working Effect into your code base if you want, or you can just keep it
Hmm.
in that little piece. Um, so yeah, I think that
Yeah,
it's. Sorry, go ahead, Sean.
I'd say it feels very much like an investment in your future as a developer. I mean, I think that incremental adoption is really huge for a framework like this. For folks that might be a little bit intimidated in trying to start to adopt Effect. Do you have what would your recommendation be in terms of like where do you start? Is it just like is the config layer a good place to start? Because it's something that every app is going to need, as an example.
Oh, that's a great question. And it, it's a great question, and I think there are multiple places that I would go like right off the bat. So I would definitely take a look at our documentation. Um, the documentation is a lot, and we don't have a great story in the docs right now about the incremental adoption like story yet, because we've been very focused on right now. Effect is in V3. We call it like Effect V3. Um, the V4 of Effect is around the corner, probably within the next few weeks to a month or so, maybe a little longer. Um, we're not committing to any timeline because we're really trying to get V4 right, because version 4 will be like our long-term stable release. We're committing to like an LTS schedule with V4. Um, and after V4 is released, the documentation is going to get like an overhaul where we're going to focus a lot more on like beginner tutorials and trying to show how the incremental adoption story works, for example, and provide a lot more examples around like how to work it into your app. But in lieu of the docs being uh, giving you that story, they are fantastic as like a reference for like how things work, how to use things, whatever. But I think the best place to go if you're interested in getting started with Effect, if you want to like start experimenting and like um, get quick feedback on code and things like that, or ask questions, is our Discord. We have a probably I'm biased, but like I think we probably have one of the best like tech communities on Discord like that I've ever been a part of. Um, there's always folks that are willing to help. There's always folks that are willing to answer questions. We're in there as well. Um, and we do our best to try to answer everything, but the community is really great also about providing their experience with different things, sharing code, like answering questions. So I would say the docs are a great place to go to like start perusing usage and things like that, but the Discord is definitely the best place to go to ask questions, like if you get stuck or you want to know if something's best practice or whatever. And as far as like how to get started, I think um, our advice is always find the part of your app that you never want to touch again because you're afraid to touch it, and convert that to Effect, because I think that that's what most folks have experienced. Like that was the aha moment for a lot of folks that I've spoken with. People who were like totally against Effect, and then we're like, okay, fine, I'll try it for like this piece piece of code that like never works or does work, but I'm afraid to touch it because I don't know how it works. Like, use it for that, and see if you can get it working, or ask us questions in Discord about how to like do conversions and things like that. Because I think that's where people start to see the value, not using it for like a toy, but using it for something
Mhm.
real. Um,
Yeah, that's really great advice. And for folks out there who are relying a lot more and more on tools like Claude and Codex to help them write code faster, is there, have you found within your community that um, that those tools can be successful in writing effect code, or is there any tips that you would give a developer to set those AI agents up for being more effective or the most effective they can be?
no, that's also a really good question. We've as particularly Mike, our kind of for those who don't know, Mike Arnaldi is the creator of Effect, and he's been doing a ton of experimentation of like how to get LLMs to do really well with Effect. Um, for At baseline, LLMs are generally reasonably good at writing basic programs with Effect, because Effect is more declarative. It's the combinators in Effect are read like natural language. You know, you Effect dot retry things. You Effect dot you succeed with things. You whatever. So it reads like natural language. But to get the AI beyond just like doing really simple stuff, there are a few things you could do. We have an MCP server, so the Effect MCP is pretty good. It's plugged into both our API reference docs and our docs website. So plugging your Claude code or Open Code or Codex, whatever, into the Effect MCP is a good first step. Um, but interestingly enough, and this actually goes even just beyond Effect, like for any language I'm working in, I've started to do this and it works relatively well. Um, I clone subtrees of repositories I'm interested in learning about or using into my project. So like I'll have like a .context directory, which maybe I'll git ignore or something. And
Mhm.
I clone the repository into that context directory and tell the LLM to look at it. Because in my experience, LLMs are really good at searching for patterns in code. You know, they may not be
Yep.
the
Yep.
greatest at like exact, because Effect is relatively new. It's 6 years old, but it's relatively new. So the learning period of LLMs might not have caught up with Effect, especially because we're about to release V4. But it like performs astoundingly well uh, if it has the code to search through, like really really well. Like it can write very very robust programs in Effect, if you kind of wire it up that way. Um, and yeah, I mean, I know some folks might not want to have like Git subtrees in their project, which I totally understand. Whatever, but even if you Git ignore the directory and like clone these projects into a context folder or something like that, it sounds so silly, but it works like so well. I didn't know how to write Rust programs, for example, like 6 months ago, and now I feel like relatively competent writing Rust and like using these libraries that have no documentation whatsoever, uh, cloning them into my Rust
Mhm.
project and like telling the LLM just to look at them. Like it just like it one shots things. It's very very good. So
That's
I don't know.
amazing.
I
That's
think
such a
that
good
the
idea.
it's so simple. It's like so simple, but it works like exceptionally well, especially for Effect, because there's a lot of patterns, um, and especially for the upcoming V4 release. Um, every method has detailed JSDoc documentation now with examples in the JSDoc. So as the LLM's like searching for patterns, it can read the JSDoc, understand how to use the method, etc., etc. So we're trying to do as much as we can to enable LLMs to work well with Effect. But yeah, I mean, just clone the project into like a subdirectory, tell the LLM to look at it, and it does very well.
Love that. Love that. Um, one more question for you, because we didn't really spend a lot of time talking about TanStack Start, but that's kind of the foundation of this application that you've built. And I'm wondering if you if there's something that you've found with TanStack that makes it a particularly valuable pair to Effect, or even if there's just something personally that the reason why you've reached for it for this demo.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start by providing the disclaimer that I'm by no stretch of the imagination a front end developer.
Fair.
My
Okay.
I am, yeah. I mean, my happy place is on the back end, and my background is actually my background is actually as a DevOps engineer, if you can believe it, data engineering, DevOps, and systems administration. But but I think what I like about TanStack is just uh, it's very, in my opinion, as somebody who's not well versed in all the different front end technologies and all the trade offs and everything like that, I found it very, for me, simple to get started with. And it was very easy to add behavior through the framework as I was building things. Um, like I really like um, the like the way you can create server functions in different ways with TanStack.
Hmm.
I really like the routing framework with TanStack. The ecosystem's also growing around the different TanStack packages that are out there. So if I wanted to plug in like TanStack Query, or if I wanted to plug in TanStack DB, or if I wanted to pull in like the new Effect Atom library, which is what the kind of like front end state management library that one of our engineers, Tim Smart, has been working on. Uh, Everything just seems to work really well with TanStack. There's not a lot of like, what's the word, magic going on. I mean, there is some
Hmm.
because of like the routing and everything, but it just felt to me like relatively straightforward to get started with. And I think that's why I chose it for this particular demo. Um, yeah, it just felt um, very clear, like what I was actually doing, as opposed to some other frameworks.
Yes, love that. Love that. I've had very similar experience as well. Um, well, Max, before we go, I can, I'll go into wherever folks are watching and streaming this, and add a follow up link with the actual repository. But for folks who are still hanging on and watching, do you want to point them to the repo for the demo?
Yeah, let me. So the repository is under my GitHub handle. I can show the link somewhere. Let me switch screens and maybe pull up a browser because I can show a few things that would be interesting to folks.
Okay.
Um, so let me just share screen window. This one. So we've got our chat interface again here. But for those who are interested in looking at the project, it's under my GitHub handle, which is IMAX153. The Netlify AI Gateway is the project where I was working on all of this stuff. Um, so you guys can feel free to take a look through all this, see if there's anything interesting. Uh, and if you wanted to contribute to this demo, I would be more than happy. Would love to see it built out a little further. But also for folks who are still hanging on and want to take a look at the website. So our website is literally effect.website. Um, and you can get links to our documentation, our blog. You can also get links to our GitHub and our Discord. So highly recommend, even for folks who are just considering Effect and want to ask questions about trade-offs, or for folks who were skeptical and then ended up adopting Effect or whatever. Join our Discord and ask questions. Everybody's always happy to answer those types of things. Um, and what else can I show? Yeah, I think the website, the repository, and the Discord are kind of like the most important places I would point folks for now.
That's great. And what I'll do is also can make sure we can put a button in that README so that folks can just click it and then deploy the site to Netlify,
100%.
and then they'll have it on their account and can start tinkering with that as well. So get that in there today as well.
Cool. Thank you very much for having me, Sean. I appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. Fun to show off
Like,
Effect.
yeah, likewise. I really enjoyed the chat, and thanks for being here with us today, Max.
Cheers.
All right, we'll see y'all next time.